Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Governors for Schools podcast, the best way to learn about a wide range of issues affecting today's governance landscape. My name is Anthony Melia, Partnerships Manager with the team here at Governors for Schools, and I am delighted to be one of your hosts today. I am joined by my colleague Claire, who I will let introduce herself.
Hello everyone, my name is Claire Skinsley and I am the Partnerships Manager for our corporate partners here at Governors for Schools.
This podcast is geared towards an introduction to school governance for finance professionals, as we know both the need for such professionals across school boards and the value that they bring to the governing table. At the time of this recording, we are running our Inclusive Governance campaign. We always encourage volunteers to bring inclusivity to the forefront of their role, ensuring boards are representative of the communities they serve. This is something which we will look to link into our conversation today concerning our guest experience. Speaking of which, today we are joined by Alex Marsh, who is a finance professional and a school governor. I will now hand over to Alex to introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Alex Marsh. I am very proud to be a school governor, so that's from a volunteer side. I spent the past 20 years working in the UK banking and payment sector. That included 5 years at Klarna, where I was the UK CEO. Alongside my professional life, always been very active in terms of volunteering. So yeah, I've been a school governor for the past 8 years. I also founded a charity called Charterpath, which I now run with a friend, which is all about linking up charities and schools with volunteers with financial skills.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. We'll be talking with Alex throughout this episode to better understand how finance skills are so vital to the role of a thriving school governing board and to gain some insight into his school governor journey. As hosts, Claire and myself will be contributing today by letting you know more about who we are at Governors for Schools, why Alex's mission resonates so strongly with us, and how you yourself can get involved and utilize your invaluable skill sets. So, to kick us off, I thought it'd be good if we could talk a little bit about Alex's governor journey. So, if you wouldn't mind, Alex, can you talk us through your governor journey in terms of where it started and what made you interested in becoming a governor in the first instance?
Yeah, sure. So it's probably when I think about that question, I think the honest answer is it goes all the way back to my own childhood. So I grew up in Brighton, where I live now, middle child of 3 brothers, with a mum who is a maths teacher. So I was one of those kids where I think because I was a typical middle child, always sort of craving for attention. You know, neither the first child who's sort of special first child or the baby of the family. And I quickly found that actually being successful at school was one of the ways that I could almost sort of stand out. And so absolutely, I would be sort of the definition of at school, like one of those sort of nerds you had at school. You know, I had even built like a sort of mini science lab in our garage as a child and just absolutely loved it, kind of really threw myself into it. And for me, it fed lots of sort of opportunities in my life. So I was the first person for our family to really, growing up at state school, but very lucky to then go on and go to University of Cambridge, where I got to study chemistry, surprisingly. But it was really that sort of sowed that seed of loving to learn, and then went on to then study to be a chartered accountant, and that's kind of where my finance career started. And then actually it was in my professional life, I really threw myself into my professional life, and to be honest, probably at the detriment of other things, whether it was kind of hobbies and friends and other things like that. Really just got my head down and really threw myself in my career. And it was actually when I was working in a UK bank in the centre of London, right in the city, and they had the opportunity volunteered to read with children in Tower Hamlets, and it was incredible. We went out to this school about 9-10 years old, and it was just an absolute eye-opener to sort of 1.5 miles from the office where we were working, but then to see sort of the deprivation, frankly, on your doorstep, and helping kids to give them a bit more time to support them with reading. Many of them English was a second language, but seeing them, they were reading and helping them read books where they're the same books that at home, we had a daughter, Isabel, that she was reading at probably 4 or 5 years old. And you just kind of realise what impact this is going to have in terms of their ability to read, what that would mean for their future school life, their future careers. And it was actually that, where we then moved down to Brighton, the trigger for me to then think, right, what more can I do to support? I've had so many benefits from my own state school education. What more can I do to support? And I had the idea to then become a school governor, and got in touch and became a school governor linked to being the finance link governor. So going back to that sort of finance background that I had, it was an opportunity to bring some of those finance skills very quickly to a secondary school. And then from there, opened up so many opportunities in terms of, we could talk about it more, but opportunities then as chair of governors. And I've been there now for 8 years, and currently supporting on both kind of student personal development, mental health, but also career side, which obviously is really important.
Brilliant, thank you. It's always such a treat to hear from governors about what their inspiration was for moving into volunteering on a board. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, even if some of them are our place governors, will be able to relate to that experience of bringing forward your own memories from being younger, other voluntary opportunities which have informed how you might want to dedicate some of your spare time, and also how you can bring in a lot of your professional development as well. So that's actually a really universal experience among a lot of the volunteers that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for sharing that. So I'll pass over to Claire now, who has a question around the changing nature of your role as a governor.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. And Alex, it was great to hear about how you kind of got into the governor role. And I know that you mentioned you've been a school governor for 8 years now, and you also mentioned that you're now a chair of governors. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that really, and to see whether your view on the school governor role has changed throughout your time in the role, if at all.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, one part, just being really honest about it, when I first got in touch, like I wanted to support, and I wanted to get involved, and I wanted to be involved in our local community. But I genuinely had no idea of the scale of like school governors in the UK. So I was like doing a bit of a Google, and it's the largest single group of volunteers in the UK, over 300,000 school governors, and that kind of just the sheer scale of it is unbelievable. And I think, and the importance of that role, and the variety of kind of skills that you can bring to those roles. For me, like the finance link side was the real obvious entry point coming in, because it was my background, and I think even 8 years ago, some of the challenges that schools face financially were starting to become more apparent in terms of funding. And that's why, at the time, the school that I contacted were really keen to get someone who had, I trained as a chartered accountant, who had that kind of background to support and bring, I suppose, sort of more advice and challenge to the school's finance. One of my experiences over that 8 years has been that I think those financial challenges have just intensified in that 8-year period, and I don't think our school's alone in that. And that this isn't coming from a political perspective at all. It's just sort of thinking about the reality. And I think there's different drivers behind some of those increased sort of challenges financially. Obviously, we saw, for example, obviously like inflationary costs in the last few years have like had a huge impact on schools. Rising energy costs, etc., has been a big driver in that. But also the complexity of the need of students has really changed over that time. And in terms of, for example, in our school, I think over a quarter of our students have some form of special educational needs that needs, additional support. So I think that I could definitely see that the sort of demand on governors to provide that element of the kind of pillars of their responsibility around finances has really intensified. And I think when I first joined, it was probably more to, advise and challenge the head teacher in the school team and the sort of strategic direction. But I think the finances has become such a sort of meaty topic. I think some like particular bits that have kind of moments that have stood out for me when I think about that journey. Obviously, the impact of the pandemic, and I think when I looked at some of the back to that point around some of the challenges that we've had, I see it now as sort of the link for mental health, some of the challenges on students, post-pandemic. But if I go back just to the absolute nuts and bolts of when, as chair of governors, we were, suddenly finding ourselves in a situation where externally you knew, things were happening, and it was, getting, I suppose, a bit sort of more worrying in terms of what this like new virus could mean. But then suddenly we were like invoking this sort of disaster recovery business continuity plan that had been this sort of 1 in 25-year scenario. Sort of, we talked about the school building closing, for example, in the context of if the school burnt down or something. And then suddenly we found ourselves in this situation where essentially we were closing the building down, apart from, a very small group of students, those where parents were in sort of key roles, etc. And the sort of implications and consequences of that, and sort of the demands on governors, again, particularly like I was finding for myself, trying to make sure I was providing the right support to the school team, because they're obviously same situation, completely crazy scenarios like playing out in reality, and how we keep the students supported. But to bring it back to the finance side, just briefly on that particular scenario, because it was like such a difficult and challenging time. But we found very quickly we were going out to families and students to try and support them for home teaching. And just the reality of suddenly finding, back to roughly, I think 30% of our students on pupil premium. Like, we have a very kind of mixed catchment for our secondary school in Brighton. And, we're suddenly finding, many of them, they didn't have laptops at home. They didn't have a computer that, the student could access for home learning. But not only that, so we then were getting all the laptops out of schools, like literally driving them around, but didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And there's things that often we live in this sort of neat bubble of life where all these things are seen. Oh, you could switch to, to home learning. And again, I go back to the finances. We're in a situation where we had it was a lot of meetings, but we were able to make decisions very, very quickly because we managed our finances very, very, tightly and monitored very tightly to invest in additional laptops, to invest in Wi-Fi dongles, and got them out to kids like that weekend, that first weekend. So in theory, on the Monday, we had all the students could be going into remote learning. And that fundamentally came down to an amazing school team, got an incredible head teacher in the school, but also the role that governors played to kind of step in and support, make decisions quickly. And we found that relative to, say, some other secondaries, not just in our, Brighton and Hove, but it took up to 6 weeks to get their students to that same situation of having all university having access to laptops and Wi-Fi. So it's kind of one of those moments where you really felt like both the skills that you brought, but also really brought to life the roles of governors, where this isn't just like it doesn't have to just be a termly meeting, and actually you could really change the impact of the lives of kids in your community. So that really kind of stands out to me as one of those kind of pivotal moments where all the different strands, what it means to be a governor, working with the school, managing the finances, really came to life to make a big difference.
Yeah,
Very
definitely.
rewarding.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Alex. And I suppose one of the 3 core functions, one of them being overseeing the financial management of the school, I suppose that took on a whole new light during the pandemic.
Completely, because in time, like, the government moved to provide additional funding to provide access to, whether it was laptops, Wi-Fi, and other resources. But it understandably took time because you're trying to roll that out across thousands of schools. But we were able to make decisions because have been monitoring the finances very closely in terms of like both the sort of day-to-day running costs, but also like the capital expenditure that we had within the school. We were able to make decisions very, very quickly about like repurposing funds and actually to take a step back and think bigger picture. What's more important, like a project that's planned for like 9 months' time to do X, Y, or Z versus like getting kids to be able to be taught on Monday. And so we took those decisions collectively. And I think, I think for me at the time, I was very, very busy in my professional life as well. Like, I was leading Klarna at the time and, growing very, very quickly, bizarrely. But during the pandemic, everyone was stuck at home, online shopping. But this gave me a real sense of purpose in terms of, thinking, I'm not just at home working, sat at a laptop. I'm actually doing something where there are always amazing people, whether it was like scientists creating a vaccine, whether it's nurses, supporting people in like, ICU, wards, etc. Lots of people, I think many of us felt helpless, apart from go out and bang a saucepan. But this was something where you could really look back and think, actually, you could make a difference in your community and really help. And I think we've seen the benefits of that, if I'm honest. Like, a couple of years on, sort of legacy of that in terms of both the quality of teaching, but also just the infrastructure to teach during that period, what that's meant for students now who are, for example, sitting their GCSEs or finishing them like these very weeks right now when we're recording this. The difference that actually they got some quality teaching during that period of time that gave them the foundation blocks.
Yeah. Alex, just linking on to that, I just wanted to ask you what your process looked like in becoming a chair of governors and how you might describe your experience in that role as compared to when you were a school governor.
Yeah, so when I first came in, I think the finance link role, to be fair, was a really good route into, I think, for example, then going on to be chair of governors. Because I think from looking at the finances across, you got to see almost like the whole end-to-end sort of running and operation of the school, particularly from a financial lens. And so that I think quite quickly I felt like I kind of understood how the school was running. Now, again, sort of the reality of the chair of governors role, it is a different demand than a, for example, being the finance link governor or the link governor for curriculum or other areas or careers like I am now, because you are, ultimately you're helping with the head teacher to drive, fully drive that strategic direction. We had a situation where I'd been a governor for just over a year, and so not long, and we we had to change our chair very, very quickly at very short notice. And it was one of those things where, with all the best planning, succession planning, etc., it was one of those conversations where the chair of governors was standing down, and there was an element of, right, unfortunately, our deputy chair wasn't in a situation personally to take on the role. I suddenly found many gazing eyes on myself very intensely. I think some of it because I was doing some of those, types of roles in a professional capacity, maybe. And so, actually, I was very clear at the time. I can't make a decision in a governing board meeting like that. It's one that does, warrants, proper decision discussion. But yeah, off the back of some of those early conversations, met with the current, who was then the current chair, the head teacher, and for me, the role was really appealing because we were at a sort of an inflection point in the school. There was quite a lot of change going on. We were looking at sort of expansion of the school as an example, and the funding was becoming more of a challenge. And so yeah, sort of the opportunity. There are those things where those sort of roles come up maybe every 2 or 4 years. So I thought actually, look, there's a chance here. I remember speaking to a few friends, and they're like, "Do you think I should do it? It's going to be a big time for me." They're like, "You get these chances very often." So grabbed it and absolutely loved it. I thought it would be probably our term in our school is for 2 years, but at the end of those 2 years, it had gone very quickly. To be fair, agreed to then take on the chair for another 2 years, but genuinely could not have imagined that that would then go into a situation, for example, like the pandemic, like where it was just, it was such a extreme scenario. But I look back on that 4 years. In that 4 years, went through physical expansion in the school, so new buildings, went through student expansion, so we increased the school size by 150 students, and we went through a situation where we went to sort of remote learning, and during that time we went on to become having like the in terms of student outcomes, like the highest progress 8 and attainment 8 for Brighton and Hove in terms of state schools. So but again, incredibly proud of what we were able to achieve as a team, and appointed a new head teacher during that period. So got to share pretty much all the different things you could kind of imagine in a 4-year period. But yeah, incredibly proud. And then I thought to myself again, sort of in all honesty, I thought maybe when I'd finished the chair role that maybe that would be the right time to sit down and do something different. But I'd say being a school governor, it's quite addictive because you kind of build your knowledge and understanding of the school, and you get to know more people, whether it's the governors, whether it's the school team. And I suddenly found myself, I just couldn't step away. So hence I agreed to move on to other areas in terms of student personal development, which I think the mental health off the back of the pandemic and seeing that as chair was something like where I really thought I could support. And then also just careers development, because again, during the pandemic, we weren't able to do, for example, work placements. So again, trying to work out clever ways to support students in terms of career development and reopening up to work placements. And so I've been doing those areas for 18 months now. I absolutely love it.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to hear how much progression that you've had in the role, like especially from a personal perspective. And that leads me on nicely now to pass over to Anthony, who I believe is going to ask a question regarding budgets.
I am. As Claire said, it was so fantastic to hear about the different ways in which the school has expanded and continued to progress, particularly during a really tough time that was the pandemic and the impact of remote learning. One of the things that when I was listening to you that I picked up on was a lot of talk around finance and monitoring budgets. Now, this is obviously something which differs from school to school, from academy to academy, but I really wanted to ask, what does monitoring budgets actually look like on your school board, or what would it be like for our volunteers who wanted to go?
So to the point that you said, Claire, about sort of development and learning opportunities, I was very fortunate. I had like lots of like support and learning and training, and when I took on the finance link role, and actually I think from my professional life as well, there was lots of sort of experiences and tools and approaches that you develop for just managing I'd had roles in my professional life as a finance director or a CFO for a period of time at Klarna in the UK. And so I felt like I could kind of bring those elements together. Plus, we had on our governing body, we did have a couple of other individuals who came from kind of finance roles or finance backgrounds. And so for us, the monitoring ultimately has become quite hands-on. And I think, back to the sort of, I suppose, the challenges financially. When I first joined as a governor there, the school actually had a surplus. I mean, that's almost unheard of in state schools in the UK now, but we had sort of a relatively healthy surplus that a school had sort of built up. And, we were looking at ways to invest that, etc. And obviously that has now gone. And we're in a situation where actually the close monitoring is really important. Steps that we took on a practical level, and I'd really recommend, was we did mobilise, finance working group, finance committee as an offshoot from the main governing body. And that was fundamentally to give more time, offline from the governing body agenda to really kind of scrutinise, challenge, question and build understanding of the school's finances. So we have always, every governing body meeting, finance as an update item on there. But yeah, between every governing body meeting, we have a finance committee. And it's typically led by the head teacher and the school's business manager in our case. But they'll be sharing both the kind of latest actual financials, so in terms of what have we spent, for say the previous term versus what was in the budget, any kind of unexpected items, either overspends, unspent. We'll also have within those sessions a reforecast essentially for the full year. So whilst we've got the budget for the full school year, what's the kind of latest full year outlook in terms of the school finances? And not just a top level. So it's not kind of just like, oh, look, we expected to have, a small surplus of £30,000 and it's actually 10, or we're doing that down at a line item level. We're looking at things, for example, when we look at the, one of the largest items obviously for us is like the school team costs, so both teaching and non-teaching staff, and looking at that in the context of, for example, the actual structures of the staff, the different pay bands that we have within staff. That links through to sort of pay recommendations as well. And then other areas we look at in terms of monitoring, we'll look at on the non-staff, we'll be monitoring at a line item level for whether it's things like, the cost net of the canteen that we operate, or cleaning costs or energy costs like we talked about. We'll also look at, for example, contracts that we have within the school for third-party suppliers. So that could be energy contracts, for example, to really look at those to see, are there opportunities to, ultimately optimize the costs that we have to get the best service. So yeah, it's really, from a finance committee perspective, like a really good, sensible level of scrutiny. I think the school team really value the support that we're bringing, the kind of challenge. It's very constructive, and gives them sort of hopefully a route to get advice and support. But one important point I would add to that, Anthony, is that we've got members on that finance committee who are both people like myself who come from a finance background, but also people from a non-finance background. Because I think one part which is so important is to have those different perspectives. Ultimately, schools aren't just a profit and loss business. If you see, ultimately it's about the trade-off in terms of the different ways you can use the funds to ultimately drive the best possible outcomes for your students. And so having broader perspectives where you're getting the right challenge alongside obviously with the school team, I think has been really helpful. And I think also then when you then go back into the governing body, you've got people from all broad perspectives with a level of understanding. I think you can have that situation understandably where the finance can end up being sort of led by a very small group of governors. Actually, where we've got to is it's a broad group, and I think that's where you get the best outcomes in terms of decisions on where you use the money to get the best possible student outcomes.
I agree. I think it's fantastic that you just raised that point, Alex, around how a lot of this might be new for governors coming in, but that really great governing boards are a collaborative effort. They're a team effort. There's usually around 7 to 12 people who sit on a governing board, and I think what unites them all, despite the variety of professional experiences, will be that they have a passion and a willingness to learn about how to improve a school for the benefit of all of their young people. So that's really great to hear, particularly about the collaborative nature.
And I think you can get that situation with finance where people can, I think typically finance professionals, but typically inadvertently, can make it a bit like exclusive or separate, and whether it's the language they use or the reports that they use. And I think one of the things that we've got a really good business manager in our school, she's fantastic, and she very much can bring the school's finances to life in a way that everyone can understand, where you can sort of go, right, we want to run that program to help that specific group of students. Like, we can ring fence the funds to understand what funds, for example, that we're investing in that project, and map that through to the outcomes of that project. So I think that, but I think getting to the point where all the governors can relate to the finances and it's not just sort of an abstract thing to one side, I think is really important, because that way you can, it's sort of back to how do you get the biggest return on investment for your students ultimately, and how do you get the best value for money in terms of running the school. So yeah, I think collaboration, could not agree more ultimately on the collaboration point.
Which I guess to me links to a question that I love to ask our volunteers who have been placed on governing boards for a little while, which would be, what would you say to yourself, or what little piece of advice would you give to your pre-governor self before starting out?
Well, look, talking of collaboration, like I find it very hard to like one piece of advice, so I'll like distill it to three. But the first one, like completely linked to collaboration, is to ask lots of questions. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions, and that can be as simple as I remember in those first governing body meetings, like my phone under the table, just like desperately looking up acronyms because I was too like embarrassed to go, what does EHCP mean? What does even progress 8, attainment 8? I was just desperately looking up all these phrases. And so I think asking lots of questions is really important. And there's, it's back to sort of the saying if there aren't any stupid questions. Obviously, you can use Google, and there are tools out there. So a lot of it offline from meetings you can look up yourself. And but ask questions would be one thing, and even more than you could maybe think of. And I think that links into my second point, which is particularly when you're embarking on that governor journey, but not exclusively then, is to really tap into the resources that are available. There's so many brilliant resources out there to help you perform your duties as a governor, to help better support your school, and whether that's resources from Governors for Schools, whether it's resources from the National Governance Association, whether it's resources within your school itself in terms of spending time. When I, for example, joined, I spent time with the sort of previous finance link governor to really spend time with that individual to understand the role and how they envisaged it. I spent time with the school business manager, went through a lot of the kind of resources and policy documents, and then I also got loads of free training from the local authority. So in our area they ran some really good training courses in terms of understanding school finances, understanding the budgeting process that they operated. So I think that'd be the second one, is to really tap into the resources available. And then the third one, which I think is really important, back to that point that ultimately this is a school, not a business, is to spend time in the school and get in there and really understand it and see it. Because again, you can have the situation where our governing body meetings at our school, so Barndean School in Brighton, typically in the evening, obviously to support the school team in terms of they've teaching students and running a school during the day. So typically you meet, say, 6 till 8 in the evening. You can find yourself that you're spending most of the time in the school outside of school hours. And it's quite weird in a way, because you're not actually seeing the students who are, ultimately, your role there is supporting them. So I really recommend getting time in the school, go on like learning walks, spend time with other, school team members beyond, the head and their sort of leadership team, because you can get really interesting perspectives from students, from teaching staff, from non-teaching staff about what works really well in the school. What one thing I always ask questions like, what one thing would you change or improve in the school? And so I would, they would be my 3 pieces of advice. And I think when I first joined on that last piece, I spent a lot of time with the school business manager, and I probably should have spent probably a bit more time in hindsight with the out in the school, and particularly then when I took on the chair role, that was brilliant actually, because I just got to spend a lot of time actually in the school during the day and got to really see what's going on, like the reality of it. So when you talk about things like behaviour policies, and again they can seem a bit abstract, you're actually in the school, you can see like it's amazing. Look at these students, like how they're behaving and like the respect they're showing, or whether it's the uniform policy and how does that really work in reality, like the practical side of being in school at that age. So yeah, they would be probably my 3 pieces of advice to someone who's embarking on their governor journey.
That was perfect. Thank you so much for sharing those pieces of advice, because I know a lot of our volunteers are brand new to
Yeah,
governance, and they're brand new to education. A lot of our volunteers might not have children of their own,
yeah.
or may have left education a while ago. So to hear that there's lots of support out there, not just from Governors for Schools, but from local authorities and from people who are already working in our schools day in, day out, is really fantastic. Claire, I'm aware I've chatted for a little while. Is there anything that you would like to continue on with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. And Alex, I'm really glad that you touched on that point actually about kind of a school governor. They don't just attend the board meetings, kind of like when working with local authorities and schools within our organisation. One thing that the school boards always say to me, they're like, you want a governor that's committed, someone that's going to attend the celebration events, so the Christmas plays and the school fairs and things like that. There's so much more to it than just kind of attending your set out meetings for the year. So yeah, really glad that you touched on that point.
Best day of the year, Claire, is the results day. Like absolutely, like I always try and get in for that. And I think again that was one of the interesting things as being chair. In a way, I became more aware of some of those items. But then once I've done that, I've it's hard to give those things up. But ultimately, that's such a big day. I try and get out to things like the sports days and some of the really important sports matches the schools have, because that's been really important for us. And then we have amazing, as part of the Brighton Festival, we had the artist open houses, and the school opened up and showcased loads of the students artwork. It's just phenomenal. And one thing I absolutely love actually is that when you bump into someone and you're in Brighton where I live, and I don't often tell them that I'm a governor of Arndine. I often engineer towards finding out. And I was chatting to actually outside the school gates of my kids, primary school, and one of the parents was saying, "Oh, they've been up to this artwork at Arndine for the open houses. It was just exceptional." And she was an artist, and she was saying, "I do teaching at Brighton University, and the quality of some of the students' artwork was higher than I'm seeing in some of the students at the university." And it's that's it. Oh yeah, I'm actually a governor up at Barndean. That's really interesting. But actually, to be able to go and relay that into the school team, that's the stuff that they want to hear, and often they don't hear, if you see what I mean, because they're dealing with day to day. And so I just all of that, everything that wraps around it is what makes the experience for students so special, but also will set them on the path to give them the same choices that hopefully give them the same choices that I had in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well that's why sometimes with our volunteers that come through Governors for Schools, they might think that it's a 4-year term, right, a school governor role, but really it takes you time to get to know the school and the workings of the school, the children that attend the school community. So yeah, it just kind of links back to what you were saying there. I just wanted to touch on, Alex, you were saying, rightly so, that a school governing board is made up of volunteers who have a variety of skills and different professional backgrounds. So I just wanted to delve a bit deeper into that then and ask, how do you support others on the board who bring additional skills aside from finance?
Yeah.
Obviously, finance being one of those key core responsibilities, how do you kind of help?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things again that I've just absolutely loved about being school governor has been the variety of people that I've met, and coming from all different backgrounds and all different skills. And I think that's just one of the great things about being a school governor is that variety. And I think there's two parts from a finance specific side that I'm quite firm with in a way. It's on the one hand, you'll often get people I spend a lot of time. So through the charity I started, Charterpath, that we help connect charities with volunteers' financial skills. You often hear from sort of trustees where they're looking for someone with say finance skills, and say I'm not a finance person. I don't get the numbers. I'm not and I'm often quite tough on that message about ultimately we manage our personal finances. That's a responsibility that we take ourselves. And I appreciate, for some people that's more challenging. But ultimately we take that on to manage, month in, month out, that we can make our finances work year in, year out, mate. And what we're asking for governors coming to school is to have that sort of similar mindset. And that does require some investment to understand it, and some time. And so that's why, for example, encouraging some of our governors who don't come from a finance background to come into the finance committee. So actually making them feel really welcome to come in, making them feel able to ask any kind of question that they want, spending time with them offline from the meetings to talk through the finances. Because to get to that point where you can provide decent challenge and feel accountable, frankly, for it, you need to have a level of understanding. So I think it is a sort of a two-way street, I think. And so another part of that is, we've run some dedicated training, for example, for all governors on the finances. We've run some really detailed sort of briefings. So we run additional sessions, for example, when it comes up to timing to sign off the budget, and give more time to it in the governing body meeting. Because again, it's just so fundamental to that school that the budget works and the finances work. And you see some of the challenges and the implications for schools where they haven't been able to apply that kind of rigor. And I appreciate every school is different in terms of the challenges of their finances, but ultimately, the sort of, do they fundamentally work in terms of income per student and the operating, the running costs? But every school can apply that same rigor as sort of the challenge and escalating. We've escalated and raised points, for example, through to the local authority where we just haven't been able to get the finances fundamentally to work, or the school structures to work within the finances that we have. So I think, in terms of specifically, I think the training, the use of the finance committee to being an accessible group, dedicated time offline, really straightforward language that we use, really good quality reports that go into the governing body meeting with some commentary that goes with it. It's one thing to share a 16-page PDF spreadsheet, which anyone's going to find quite hard to understand, versus sharing that with, say, a 2-page commentary that goes with it. It highlights some of the key areas. We've highlighted the rows where there's either overspend, underspend. I think they're all ways where then collectively people can start to understand it. You then have a much better conversation and dialogue. And then the other part, which I think is really important for all schools, linked to the finances and linked to the monitoring question that I raised earlier, is around having clear sort of recommendations and asks. And that's, again, sort of collaboration between the school team and the governors when it comes to finances. So rather than kind of, sometimes you can present this information and you kind of get to the end of it from a finance perspective, and it's sort of like, what's the so what? So what? What does that mean? We're okay? Does it mean it's a disaster? Does it mean we need to change something? And I think taking that extra step from a finance perspective to go, look, because of X, Y, and Z, we're going to actually have to, we went through a really big restructure a few years ago, and it was really hard, laid people off and made some really, really difficult decisions. But that was off the back of some really good analysis over a long period of time, then basically a recommendation. So look, the only way that we actually can make this work financially now is to look at the structure, the leadership structures all the way through the school. So I think then when you get to that point, then to Ant's point earlier, you get like a collaborative culture where then that naturally drives a high level of accountability across all governors.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that highlights the point that there'll be skills that you bring to the governing board, and there'll also be skills that you gain while being on part of a governing board. And again, I guess that's a benefit for anyone that would like to, is thinking about pursuing the school governor role. It's the fact that there is benefits for you as a volunteer, rather than just kind of for what you're also providing to the school and the school community as well. So definitely, that's great. Thank you, Alex. I believe Ant has one more question for you.
I do. I've only been speaking with you for just under 40 minutes, but I can tell that you're obviously motivated by giving something back to your local community and causes that have a positive impact on us as a whole, as